Hey everyone, Kathaar here. As some of you might know, resident lorehound gone rogue Prideslayer has released an interesting video titled How Wokeness Killed RuneScape. We'll be going through this video to find out if the woke agenda truly is the fall of RuneScape, or if this video is just the next step on Prideslayer's path to be as openly antagonistic to Jagex as he can be. Let's get started.
We'll be talking about some controversial topics today, and I also need to ask that you please do not harass anybody whose statements or actions we examine in today's video.
Always a good sign we're gonna find some spicy takes in your video. You'll love to see it. Oh, don't blame me! I told my fans not to do anything! Excuse me while I sharpen these completely unrelated pitchforks real quick.
Ultimately, I hope to present this with some journalistic integrity.
Oh good, all hope is not lost. He did his research. That's what that means, right?
RuneScape 3 used to genuinely be a game that people were excited to play.
Oh no. Opinion-based conjecture being stated as facts. That's alright, we all make mistakes. I won't hold judgment for now. Surely there will be plenty of time for some of that good old-fashioned journalistic integrity he was talking about earlier.
You couldn't wait to get off work or school to kill the newest boss or do the newest quest with your friends. But unfortunately, now those types of updates are few and far between, being greatly overshadowed by holiday seasonals, which are essentially MTX casinos, or outright just MTX itself, like treasure hunter updates.
We're gonna ignore that in comparison to the last 10 years, RuneScape's update cadence has been pretty solid, with new bosses and quests becoming much more regular. Hell, his argument even has a modicum of credence because 2023 and 2024 saw the creation of these holiday hubs, or MTX casinos as he calls them, for 3 out of 4 seasons, and that dev work cut into the development of other projects. The public backlash that the inevitable content drought brought on was so bad that the devs had to provide a public apology, stating that trying to commit to hammering out all 4 hubs in one cycle was a terrible idea and shouldn't have happened. They further stated that the 4th hub, the summer-themed Land of Sunlight, was indefinitely postponed while the devs shifted their attention back to mainline content. However, I'd also like to note that these seasonal hubs were introduced as an answer to people asking for more consistent holiday content, as prior years had been extremely bare bones to outright non-existent, as the devs didn't have the time to keep creating new temporary content year after year. So the answer was these semi-permanent hubs that could be reiterated on each year to give players something to do, without adding much to the dev team's overhead. Hell, they even went out of their way to use realms that had previously only existed in lore books to create these locations and tie them to the lore of the game. Holiday events and quests have been a staple to RuneScape for as long as the game has existed, so this was an attempted return to form by Jagex. Whether it holds up or not is entirely subjective, but it's necessary to point out why these pieces of content even exist to begin with. Personally, if you set aside the MTX tainting that plagues these hubs, just as it plagues many other facets of the game, these hubs are solid overall. They do exactly what they set out to accomplish. They're easy for devs to iterate on, so subsequent holiday events take less time to develop. They give players something to interact with in between content updates. And they, especially in the case of the most recent spring event, bring players together to participate in community events like the Community Egg Hunt. Still, your mileage may vary, and I can fully understand why people don't like these hubs, especially as they can be a driving force for FOMO and unhealthy gameplay. Oh, would you look at me rambling? I nearly forgot about Prideslayer's video. What was he talking about again?
I think we can all agree that even if you still love RuneScape, the game is a hollow shell of what it used to be. We used to look forward to epic content like the Archaeology Skill or Elder God Wars, or quests where we stop horrors from another universe.
He continues to reiterate his point about there being too much MTX, but I can't help but laugh at these random screenshots he's throwing over his dialogue. What are you trying to say? Why are you zooming in on this poor man's crotch? Who is this guy? John MTX? What exactly is the connection you're trying to make here? Are you trying to say he's sexualized? Are you trying to say Wish.com Voldo isn't? Look at this man. This is the peak male form. Anyway, he carries on railing against MTX, and justifiably. pointing out the discrepancies between earned profits and what goes back into the game. Again, these are good points that I agree with. The answer to MTX in RS3 will always be the same. Too much of it exists. I wonder if this is where his argument's going? Speaking on how MTX overbears too much on the content development cycle of the game and actively harms it and its player base. But if that's his angle, then why is it called How Wokeness Killed RuneScape?
Why does Jagex continue to make content for a small minority of players?
Huh? I mean, sure, the holiday stuff isn't as cool as new quests or anything like that, but I wouldn't say they're for us.
What does woke mean, though? Woke is typically the performative adoption of radical ideology in order to virtue signal and ultimately sell more product.
So that's why he named it How Wokeness Killed RuneScape. Of course. I find his definition of woke peculiar. A performative adoption of radical ideology. Well, seeing as Prideslayer has done nothing so far to warrant me trusting his word, let me check on that definition of his. According to Merriam-Webster, the modern definition for woke is aware of and actively attentive to important facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. That is a wildly different definition. But are we honestly surprised? Nothing about this definition fits his argument. So instead, he uses a definition loosely tied to the disingenuous hijacking of the term by right-wing parties. Again, as per Merriam-Webster, woke is often used mockingly or sarcastically to suggest insincerity about one's expressed beliefs about social issues. Let me be frank here for a moment. If the crux of your entire argument relies on you using a mocking pseudo-definition of a term to make your point, your argument is weak. If the point you're trying to make here holds any water, it should be easy to make that argument without resorting to lying, misinformation, and pandering. If you can't, well, again, that says a lot about the strength of your argument, doesn't it? He then goes on to make a comparison. In 2024, there was a small in-game Pride event, and at the same time, the Daemonheim dig site was released. He goes on to say that the dig site didn't even have an ending cutscene, and implies that the end to a 15-year mystery was snubbed because too much development time was spent on the Pride event. Clearly, this had to be the event's fault, not the fact that Daemonheim is a mini dig site, and mini dig sites don't get intro or outro cutscenes. Not the fact that this was a passion project made during Game Jam, and despite that, Mod Alex still went out of his way to graphically update the entire Daemonheim island, something not in the original scope of the project. But no, this is clearly the fault of the evil woke agenda.
Journalistic integrity.
He didn't even get his facts straight about the Pride event. The banner he mentions came out 2 years prior to that event. The event itself consists of just talking to 11 NPCs across the map and then walking a loop through Varrock. The rewards? A plushie, an overhead emote, and a hat. Recolorable, sure, but still, not much dev time was assigned to this. Prideslayer is either intentionally or naively falling for the zero-sum fallacy. That if something he doesn't like exists, it has to be at the cost of something he does like. Daemonheim dig site didn't get cutscenes. It has to be because the Pride event exists. This isn't how this works. This isn't how any of this works. And I can guarantee that if there was no Pride event in 2024, if absolutely no dev time was spent on it whatsoever, Daemonheim still wouldn't have gotten a cutscene. Where were we? Only 3.5 minutes in? Anyway, let's continue.
So we of course can't forget that RuneScape changed the gender binary in the game from male and female to body type A and B.
Let me ask you, viewer. If you were to just watch this clip completely out of context, which game would you think he's talking about? RS3? Yeah, me too. It's the only thing he's been referencing or discussing up until this point, so that makes sense. So imagine my surprise when I log into RS3 and check Makeover Mage to see male and female. Surely Prideslayer's journalistic integrity means he didn't make a mistake and hallucinate an update that didn't happen, right? Right? This update only happened in old school RuneScape. Of course, he never states this, or even remotely implies this. Instead, he implies the opposite, and just makes up something that doesn't exist. Who doesn't love a bit of misinformation in our wildly under-researched propaganda videos?
Journalistic integrity.
Also, if old school RuneScape has this whole Type A, Type B thing going on, How come you aren't harping on that game for having gone woke? Is it because old school RuneScape doesn't have predatory microtransactions? You seem to keep making this connection that MTX is woke, when you could just as easily say MTX is bad or MTX is over-predatory, and you'd have a much easier time making your argument. Speaking of the Makeover Mage, he goes on to claim that Jagex tweeting that the Makeover Mage is the game's oldest LGBTQ character is revisionist history. According to a postbag from The Hedge from 2006, does anybody here remember those? The Makeover Mage goes by Pete, or PETA, depending on their mood. The Makeover Mage changes genders at will. The Makeover Mage has two names that they like to go by based on their mood. This is the textbook definition of agender, and as such, plants the Makeover Mage squarely in the LGBTQ community. And again, this was in 2006. The Gowers were still running the show. What revisionist history are you talking about? When do we get to the journalistic integrity part? He goes on for a while. At this point, you'll notice a bit of a pattern. Point at something woke, and then blame it on the game's current state with no real way to back that claim. Just conjecture. Again, he almost has a point here, touching on subjects like in-game money-making methods seeing nerfs, but microtransactions being unchanged. He's so close to having a real argument here, but then like a bad habit, he ties it back into woke somehow. It's clear to me at this point that the Slayer of Pride doesn't care much about microtransactions in RuneScape and its negative effect on the game. If he did, he'd focus on that, instead of this wishy-washy everything I hate is woke and I hate MTX mindset. The reality is, he has nothing substantial to say on microtransactions that hasn't already been discussed in greater depth by others countless times before. He has nothing new to add to the conversation, so he's fabricating something new to draw attention to himself. Do you think Asmongold would be interested in watching a half-assed complaint video about microtransactions? Of course not. That's been done already. But tying it into wokeness and how the left ruins everything? Now we're talking. But hey, maybe I'm wrong, in which case I'm sure the several pleas for Asmongold's attention are purely coincidental. So if MTX isn't the real reason he made this video, then what the hell is? Get to the damn point already. It's 2025, baby. I'm 7 minutes into this video and my post-COVID attention span is just not what it used to be.
But thankfully, if your main goal is political activism at the cost of players, they picked the right person for the job.
I knew it! Before I even decided to watch this video, I knew it was only a matter of time before he mentioned Mod Yui. For those who don't know, I used to consider Prideslayer a friend. You know, back when his biggest obsession was thinking he could save them and doing crazy deep dives on the lore of the game. I took a lot of flack for sticking up for this guy because I believed he always had good intentions, despite what he would say. But late 2024, he went on a deep dive of Mod Yui's history, and I had the misfortune of having to listen to him go on and on and on about conspiracy theories about this poor man. I ended up cutting ties with him shortly after I realized that while I was always willing to stick up for him, the feeling was far from mutual. But the spiraling never seemed to stop, and clearly, neither is his obsession with specific Jagex staff.
If you've paid any attention to news in the UK, immigration has been a hot topic. This was especially true in the case of the Southport killer.
Wait, question. What's this got to do with immigration?
The son of an immigrant.
Ah, I see. Follow-up question. Was the killer also an immigrant? Just kidding. Of course he doesn't answer that. The answer is no. The killer was born in the UK and was a citizen by UK law. So, again, what's this got to do with immigration? Apparently nothing. But immigration is a hot buzzword in the US right now, so I'm sure I can think of a few reasons why he might have included it.
Well, during a vigil that was being held for these dead little girls, the community manager of RuneScape, of course, marched through London calling people racist for not wanting their children stabbed by immigrants.
What? This is his argument? He's just going to blatantly lie to his viewers' faces like that? Not on my watch. Let's take a quick look at what actually happened. On July 29th, 2024, 17-year-old Axel Rudakabana, a UK citizen born in Wales, perpetrated a mass stabbing in a dance studio in Southport, injuring 10 girls and killing 2, with a third succumbing to her injuries the following day. After news broke out, false information was released on social media that the killer's name was Ali al-Shakati, and that he was an asylum seeker who came to the UK by boat the previous year. The misinformation was propagated across the web by people like Andrew Tate and Channel 3 Now, a fake news site known for spreading misinformation in the past. Later on, Channel 3 Now would take down the misinformation news post, replacing it with an apology and confirming that the killer was not an immigrant. The original social media post claiming the killer's name was Ali al-Shaqati would later be deleted by the poster. By the next day, a riot broke out in Southport. People burned a police vehicle, threw bottles, bricks, and rocks at a mosque located close to the scene, and attacked police and news reporters. Known fascist groups like Patriotic Alternative were reported to be in attendance. It reached a point where even the mother of one of the victims was begging people to stop. It was clear at this point that the entire murder had been hijacked by people with ulterior motives. People looking to send a message. People looking to destroy. People looking for a fight. Over the next few days, mass anti-immigration protests and riots started to pop up around the nation, as Muslims, immigrants, and asylum seekers were being wrongfully targeted over the Southport stabbings. They understandably took to the streets of London in counter-protest. Maud Huey, being a member of one of these targeted groups, of course took part in the peaceful protests. Furthermore, Prideslayer claims that the protest Huey went to happened the same time as the vigil for the girls, August 11th. His argument is that attending a protest the same day a vigil took place for the deceased children is disgusting.
I think that he posted this thinking that players were going to be like, whoa, that's so cool. That's so brave and strong of you. But in fact, people like me were absolutely disgusted.
But he yet again fails to get his facts straight and conveniently misses a key detail. August 11th wasn't the first vigil, nor was it the day of the protest. The initial vigil took place on July 30th, the one that would, later that day, be hijacked and turned into a riot. Of course, Prideslayer is not disgusted by hate groups and angry mobs turning what was meant to be a peaceful time of mourning in the wake of something tragic into a destructive riot meant to spread violence. The problem is clearly the people not wanting to get blamed for something they had nothing to do with. More vigils would take place later, including on August 11th. However, the protest Huey participated in took place the day prior, August 10th. The screenshot Prideslayer uses of Maud Huey's tweet even confirms this. A tweet from August 11th stating, "Very proud to have marched with the anti-racism march through London yesterday." So every angle he's pushing here falls flat immediately if you're even remotely familiar with the subject matter.
Journalistic integrity.
The only disgusting thing here is Prideslayer using a horrific thing that happened, the Southport stabbing, as justification to target a person he doesn't like. The irony is so upsetting that I don't even have a joke I can toss in here to lighten the mood. This is just wrong.
But unfortunately, creators in the UK aren't allowed to speak out on this topic, as you can be jailed for that. So thankfully, this production takes place in the United States of America. Thank you, First Amendment.
It really wouldn't be an alt-right video without a mention of the First Amendment and bad AI images, would it?
Ultimately, though, I don't think this individual cares about RuneScape at all. I think that this position is being used to push politics.
I'd love for him to explain how a community manager of all things is expected to pull that off, but I think you and I both know he never will. He then goes on to discuss the company that Maud Huey founded before joining Jagex as a community manager, Gamers Inc. Side note, 10 out of 10 name for a company, literally no notes. You absolutely slay. He allegedly sat and watched through all the company's YouTube content and perused their website to learn more about the company. Holy shit, guys! I think I finally found the first glimpse of journalistic integrity. But what's the catch? He mentions their YouTube and Blue Sky. Holy crap! He mentions their YouTube and Blue Sky subscriber and follower numbers, showcasing that they're low. I found it a bit weird that he only mentioned 2 social media sites and not even Twitter. Instead, he chose the much smaller social media platform Blue Sky. So, flexing a bit of journalistic integrity of my own, I went and took a look at Gamer Inc.'s presence on social media. My findings were unsurprising. Their Twitter has 3,200 followers, their Facebook group 2,100 followers, and their Instagram has over 13,000 followers. So I'd say for a niche community group designed for LGBTQ locals of London to meet up in person and bond over a common love for gaming, their internet presence is pretty good. He goes on to state that according to Yui's LinkedIn, all his professional references are just members of this company he founded. Well shit, all my professional references are previous coworkers too. Guess I can never hack it as a community manager. Also, none of my professional references are on LinkedIn. They're all in written document form that I can easily send to hiring managers. For all we know, the references on his LinkedIn aren't the only ones he has.
It appears that the hiring managers for Jagex did not do their due diligence, and they're either A, lazy, or B, they wanted to hire an LGBTQ activist as community manager of a 25-year-old game.
Or C, he interviewed well, and his previous experience as a community manager for another game developer gave them confidence in his ability to perform. But that's just a guess.
And it's abundantly clear that the ads and media that they put out there is completely out of touch with the game.
There's that guy in the leotard again, the writing tutor from the most recent April Fool's event. What's Prideslayer's obsession with this guy? Wait. He looks familiar. That's the same writing tutor model they used in the 2016 Gower quest. Are the Gowers woke now? Is he honestly trying to make the argument that a character model from a quest made in 2016 being reused for a one-day-long April Fool's event is somehow tied to woke? What?
RuneScape was never meant to be a canvas upon which political activism was painted. It was meant to be an escape from reality.
This is such a cop-out statement. Politics are ingrained in modern society, and as such are part of our games. You only notice them when they don't agree with your particular worldview. This isn't new either. There's an entire quest line in the game about the dangers of global warming, and it came out in 2008. There's an entire quest line about the evils of genocide, and that one's even older. Then, of course, there is the aforementioned Makeover Mage, a clearly agender character, even if there wasn't a common term for it in 2002. Armadill's been confirmed gay for nearly a decade.
You have people who are actively trying to undo the magic of a game and preach to you. Bigotry doesn't exist in Gelinor, even though Death to the Dorgashan features humans against monsters who are quite literally human supremacists.
He shows a screenshot that says transphobia and homophobia don't exist in Gelinor. So even though I find the screenshot a bit obtuse, he's misquoting it. Regardless, you thwart the Ham organization's plans in canon repeatedly, and make it abundantly clear that their bigotry is not tolerated in Gelinor, so it's not an entirely untrue quote either. Regardless, I'm not really sure what point Prideslayer's trying to get at here. Weren't you just complaining about politics in your game? The Ham exist so the developers can point at them and say, this is wrong, genocide is wrong. That is an inherently political statement. So why aren't you upset that there's an entire racist organization bent on genocide in your game? A literal hate group you're cool with, but a pride event is where you draw the line? I don't understand. That's a lie. I'm lying. I know exactly why he seems to be openly contradicting himself right here. It's simple. Genocide is bad isn't considered a political statement because most people agree with it. It's considered common sense, and so it doesn't get as much attention or elicit any debate. Trans rights, however, isn't something the community has come to a consensus on. It can be debated, and is therefore political. It's important to note that what is considered political in this frame is anything on which the community disagrees. And so, making political statements, irregardless of rationality, means you have an agenda. And having an agenda is ruining the community. And you should stop. If you look at Prideslayer's argument through that same frame, you can clearly see why he takes such a blatantly hypocritical stance on what is and isn't political. The entire keep politics out of our games stance is a commonly used line of logic amongst people who have fallen in with antagonistic or sometimes outright fascist groups. There's a great video by Innuendo Studios titled The Alt-Right Playbook, How to Radicalize a Normie, that covers this topic in much greater detail than I can. I'll leave a link in the description below. The video covers a lot of other lines of thought that run in direct parallel with some of the things that Prideslayer talks about in his video. It's a fascinating watch, and I strongly recommend it. Now, to clarify, I am not accusing Prideslayer of being an alt-right radical who is trying to infiltrate our community. I'm saying he might be the radicalized normie. A normal guy who has normal hobbies and enjoys them. A guy who, for one reason or another, is unhappy with the state of the community he's a part of. A guy who is being convinced by others that the cause of his problems is the politicalization of his hobby, and that the solution is to purge politics from it. Of course, if you look at what he's claiming is politics, you'll notice it only seems to be things that tend to make straight white dudes uncomfortable. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. The rest of his video is just a quick outburst about Reddit, followed by a call to action for Jagex to stop with the cringe little kid garbage, along with some generic complaints about gender identity, how the game is for kids, but somehow also not for kids. It ends with,
I would prefer we get back to making epic fantasy, diving into dungeons, slaying gods, and saving mortals.
dude, it never stopped being about that. You lost the plot. You've chosen to blame marginalized groups and a political boogeyman for the game's problems instead of addressing the actual quantifiable reasons these problems exist. This isn't okay, and I hope one day you learn that. And I hope you don't have to learn it the hard way. So, to recap, Prideslayer is trying to convince you that wokeness is the reason too much MTX exists in RuneScape, and why the game doesn't get enough quality updates. It's an absurd statement, and every argument he presents to prove why wokeness is to blame falls flat on its face even under the most basic scrutiny. This is outright embarrassing, and why I chose to go out of my way to call out this video with one of my own. We, as a community, shouldn't accept this kind of scapegoating and dangerous rhetoric when the real problems are as clear as day. I hope to see more of my fellow creators speak out on this topic, as I don't think letting something like this go unchecked is healthy for the community or for the game. And with that, I thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Journalistic integrity